Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into tonight's tale of the entire timeline of Finn, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up, let's begin. Tonight we start at the very beginning of Finn's story. A tale that begins not in the safety of a castle or the halls of a great kingdom, but in the hush of the woods. Long before he became a hero, long before the world of Ooo came to know his name, Finn was simply a baby, alone among the leaves. According to the lore, Finn's origins are wrapped in mystery. His parents, human wanderers in a world already fractured by the Great Mushroom War, were unable to stay by his side. One day he was left upon a large leaf, abandoned but not entirely lost. Imagine the quiet of that moment. The wind carrying the scent of pine, the forest floor alive with soft rustles, and in the middle of it all, a child no bigger than your arm resting on nature's cradle. It feels less like an act of cruelty and more like a strange destiny, as though the land itself placed him where he needed to be found. And found he was. Joshua and Margaret, a pair of magical talking dogs, stumbled upon him and chose to take him in. They were already the parents of Jake, a pup with extraordinary powers, and in Finn they found another soul to nurture. It is a strange family on paper, a human child raised by dogs. Yet for Finn, it was the most natural thing in the world. His first memories would not be of loss or absence, but of warmth, fur, laughter, and the quiet safety of the tree fort. That tree fort, nestled in the wide green fields outside the Candy Kingdom, became the stage for Finn's earliest days. At night, its windows glowed like lanterns in the dark. In the morning, the sound of birdsong and Jake's playful barking filled the air. There was nothing grand about it, but for Finn, it was home. A place where he learned to walk, to laugh, and eventually, to dream of becoming something greater. Jake, of course, was more than a brother. The two were inseparable from the start. They wrestled in the tall grass, splashed through creeks, and explored every inch of the land they could reach on small, wobbly legs. Finn's human heart and Jake's magical stretching powers made them a duo like no other. Where one went, the other followed. And in those playful days, you can already see the roots of the bond that would carry them through battles, heartbreaks, and adventures beyond imagination. But Finn was not just a child of play. From the beginning, he carried with him a spark, a sense of destiny. The show hints that, even as a baby, Finn had an instinct for bravery. In one story, Margaret recalls how Finn once crawled into the forest, only to find himself lost among the shadows. Instead of crying out, he pressed forward, determined to find his way. Joshua and Margaret eventually found him, of course, but the moment became known as Finn's first adventure. A tiny tale, yet one that speaks to the courage that would define his entire life. Being a human in Ooo was a rare and lonely thing. The world after the Mushroom War was filled with candy people, flame beings, magical entities, and creatures beyond number. Humans, however, were nearly extinct. Finn, even if he did not yet realize it, was alone in his kind. The laughter with Jake, and the care from his parents, the kindness of BMO later on, all of it filled his days with warmth. But deep beneath it all, there was a silence, a subtle awareness that he was different, a lone flame flickering in a world of strange lights. This loneliness shaped him in ways he did not yet understand. To be the only human meant that he did not have a model for what a normal life could be. There were no human villages, no relatives to explain his history. Instead, he was a child writing his own story. Every day, carving out an identity in a land where no one looked quite like him. Perhaps this is why Finn clung so strongly to the idea of heroism. To fight for others, to protect the weak, was not just about doing good. It was about finding a place for himself in a world that otherwise might have passed him by. And so the baby in the woods grew into the boy in the tree fort, wooden sword in hand, eyes bright with possibility. Nights in Ooo were quiet, but never empty. The stars above seemed to whisper promises of quests yet to come, while the shadows of the forest hinted at dangers waiting in silence. Finn, even as a child, was drawn to both, to the light of adventure and to the dark unknown that would test his courage again and again. His earliest battles were not against monsters or villains, but against the ordinary trials of growing up. Scraped knees, storms rattling the tree fort, moments of fear when the world outside seemed too vast. But each challenge was met with determination. Each fear was softened by the presence of Jake at his side. Childhood for Finn was not a chapter of waiting. It was already the beginning of the legend. As he toddled through fields and forests, Finn was unknowingly stepping into the rhythm of Ooo itself. The land filled with magic and remnants of old human civilization seemed to recognize him in some quiet way. To the candy folk, he was an odd but endearing neighbor. To the creatures of the wild, he was a curious presence. And to himself, he was just Finn, child, brother, dreamer. In bedtime quiet, it is easy to picture him there, a small boy on the balcony of the tree fort, dangling his feet into the cool night air, gazing at the stars with wonder. He did not know yet what those stars would bring: wars, friendships, heartbreak, revelations. But in that moment, all that mattered was the vast sky and the certainty that his story had only just begun. The story of Finn's childhood is often remembered through scattered glimpses, little moments woven through flashbacks and quiet tales shared by those around him. They are fragments, but when placed together, they paint a gentle picture of a boy who never stopped reaching beyond the edges of his world. Joshua and Margaret gave him more than shelter. They gave him the framework of love, discipline, and a sense of belonging. Their home was filled with quirks and lessons. Joshua with his rough, adventurous energy, Margaret with her calm steadiness. Finn learned to balance the two. He absorbed Joshua's tales of bravery and daring, while also internalizing Margaret's quiet wisdom and practicality. The result was a boy who would one day charge into danger with both courage and conscience guiding his steps. Yet even in that warmth, the call of mystery never left him. When other children might have been satisfied playing inside, Finn felt drawn to the woods, to the rivers, to the shadows of the hills beyond. He seemed to recognize, deep in his small heart, that the world was vast, broken, and in need of someone to walk its paths. Sometimes the night would find him wide awake, listening to the creaks of the tree fort, watching the silhouettes of branches against the moonlight. It was as though he sensed that his life would never be an ordinary one. Jake, on the other hand, was more carefree. He lived in the moment, his magical stretching powers turning every afternoon into a spectacle. He would become a trampoline one moment, a flying carpet the next, and Finn was always right there with him, laughing until his sides ached. These games were not just entertainment. They were training, even if the boys did not know it. Each tumble, each leap into the unknown, built the bond between them into something stronger than steel. One of the most tender details about Finn's early life is the way he gravitated toward wooden swords and makeshift armor. Long before he encountered true weapons forged of crystal or demon metal, Finn carved or collected scraps of wood, shaping them into blades. He would duel shadows, trees, or even the wind itself, imagining himself as the defender of some grand kingdom. The irony is that, in time, his imagination became reality. The boy who played at being a knight would grow into the very hero Ooo needed. But in these early days, it was still a dream, fragile and innocent. There is also the matter of Finn's first nightmares. In the lore, his dreams are sometimes filled with strange, unsettling images, foreshadowings of his future encounters with cosmic forces. As a child, he might not have understood them, but they left impressions on his waking self. These dreams carried whispers of fire, of shadowy beings, of lands far beyond the tree fort. It is comforting to think that Jake was there on those nights, curled beside him, keeping the darkness at bay. The world outside was not always kind. Even as a boy, Finn saw glimpses of the post-apocalyptic scars left by the Mushroom War. Rusted remnants of machines half buried in the dirt, ruins where strange creatures lingered, silent reminders of a human past he had no memory of. For others in Ooo, these were just old wrecks. For Finn, they were mysteries waiting to be solved, and perhaps subtle hints of the truth he would one day discover, that he was not the first human, but one of the last survivors of a much larger story. Finn's childhood is filled with contrasts: joy and sorrow, safety and danger, simplicity and mystery. At one moment he is laughing in a sunlit meadow with Jake. In another he is staring at a rusting tower on the horizon, wondering what it once was. This duality, innocence alongside loss, shaped the way he saw Ooo. He learned early on that the world was fragile, and that it needed both care and courage to endure. The dog's influence cannot be overstated. Joshua's adventurous side instilled in Finn a respect for daring, for standing tall in the face of fear. Margaret's nurturing nature gave him stability, teaching him patience and empathy. These two threads twined together in Finn's heart, forming the foundation of the hero he would one day become. Without them, the boy left on a leaf in the forests might never have become the man who faced the Lich or walked through countless dimensions. There is something almost mythic about Finn's beginning, abandoned yet found, fragile yet resilient, ordinary yet destined for the extraordinary. Many heroes in folklore share similar beginnings: a child left to fate, discovered by unlikely guardians, raised outside their original world. But in Finn's case, the story is softened by the whimsical, dreamlike fabric of adventure time. Instead of a prophecy carved in stone, Finn's path was written in laughter, wooden swords, and bedtime stories told in a tree fort. And as the days turned into seasons, his sense of self grew. Finn was no longer just the baby in the woods. He was a boy running across the meadows of Ooo, singing songs, inventing games, and believing with all his heart that goodness mattered. The quiet mystery of his origins remained, but it did not weigh him down. If anything, it lifted him higher. He carried that mystery not as a burden, but as a light pushing him forward into the wide, uncertain world. It is easy to imagine Finn falling asleep after long days of adventure, the flicker of a lantern casting warm patterns on the walls of the tree fort, Jake snoring softly nearby. Outside, the night deepened, the stars shifted, and Ooo dreamed its strange dreams. And in the middle of it all, one small boy, unaware that he would grow into a symbol of hope, lay safe in his bed, dreaming of quests yet to come. As Finn grew, his world expanded in quiet circles, like ripples on a pond. At first, it was the safe walls of the tree fort, where the smell of pancakes and the warmth of Jake's laughter filled the mornings. Then it stretched outward to the meadows beyond, where tall grasses swayed in the wind, and the ground was soft beneath bare feet. And eventually it reached into the forests and rivers where shadows lingered, and the memory of the old world could still be found in rusted fragments and broken stone. What made Finn different from so many others in Ooo was not just that he was human, it was the way his heart responded to the unknown. Many creatures avoided the ruins, dismissing them as relics of a forgotten past. Finn, however, looked at them with curiosity. He would run his fingers over the faded paint of an old sign or press his ear against the side of a silent machine, as if hoping to hear echoes of what once was. Even as a boy, he seemed to understand that the world around him had secrets buried beneath its soil, secrets that, in some way, were tied to his own existence. Still, childhood is not only made of solemn thoughts. For every quiet moment of wonder, there were hours of carefree joy. Finn and Jake would invent games, transforming the simplest of landscapes into entire kingdoms. A stream became a mighty river to cross. A patch of woods became the lair of an imagined beast. A hill became a castle to defend. Through these games, Finn practiced bravery without even realizing it. Each leap over a stream, each shout of defiance at an invisible foe, prepared him for the battles he would face in later years. His early kindness was just as important as his courage. Finn could not walk past a struggling creature without stopping to help. Whether it was a bird tangled in vines or a candy person who had lost their way, he would go out of his way to make things right. Jake sometimes teased him for it, but he always followed along, knowing that Finn's compassion was as much a part of him as his sword hand. These small acts of kindness may seem trivial in a world filled with magic and danger, but they were the seeds from which his greater heroism would grow. The lore also whispers of Finn's strange connection to the natural rhythm of Ooo. Some say the land itself seemed to recognize him, as if the soil and sky knew that he was the last of a species that once shaped the world. Animals often warmed to him. Plants seemed to thrive in his presence, and even magical beings regarded him with a peculiar respect. Perhaps it was coincidence, or perhaps it was fate. In the soft language of bedtime reflection, it feels almost like Ooo was gently guiding him, preparing him for the path ahead. Life in the tree fort was not without challenges. Finn often wrestled with the fact that he looked different from everyone else. He had no stretchy powers like Jake, no candy-like body, no flame or ice magic. He was simply human, ordinary, fragile, breakable. Yet instead of discouraging him, this fueled his determination. If he could not bend the laws of nature, then he would train harder, climb higher, and run faster. He believed that being human did not make him less. It made him unique. And from that uniqueness, he would draw strength. Margaret's lullabies, Joshua's half-serious lessons, and Jake's ever-present companionship all blended into a childhood rich with love and meaning. But as Finn's legs grew stronger and his wooden sword sharper, so too did the world begin to notice him. The Candy Kingdom, with its gentle citizens and constant need for help, soon learned that the boy with the blue eyes and boundless courage was always ready to lend a hand. These small requests, retrieving lost items, chasing away nuisance creatures, helping rebuild candy homes after storms, were Finn's first steps into becoming the protector of Ooo. And still, the mystery of his origin lingered. Though Finn rarely dwelled on it, there were moments, perhaps in the quiet just before sleep, when he wondered where he truly came from. He had no memories of his parents, only the story of being found on that leaf. To a child, such thoughts might drift in and out like passing clouds, but deep down, that mystery left an imprint. It made him search in subtle ways for belonging, not just with Jake or his parents, but with the entire land of Ooo. His loyalty to the world and its people may have been born from this need to connect, to root himself in a place where he could matter. One story from his childhood that often surfaces is how Finn once declared with absolute conviction that he would dedicate his life to helping anyone in need, no matter what. He said it not as a boast, but as a simple truth, the way one might say the sky is blue or the grass is green. To Joshua and Margaret, it may have seemed like the playful words of a child, but in hindsight it was a vow, a promise that would echo through every season of his life. In the evenings, the tree fort often glowed like a lantern in the darkness. Inside, Finn and Jake would lie on their beds, trading stories and dreams. Jake might spin a tale about traveling to far-off lands or meeting magical beings, while Finn would imagine saving kingdoms, facing dragons, and becoming a hero sung about in stories. Their voices would fade into the hum of crickets and the sigh of the wind. These were not just bedtime conversations. They were the first drafts of destinies. What is most striking about Finn's early timeline is how ordinary and extraordinary intertwine. A boy climbing trees, playing games, dreaming at night, and at the same time, a symbol of humanity's last ember, carrying within him the potential to change the fate of an entire world. His beginning is both small and monumental, and it reminds us that even the grandest heroes start as children with scraped knees and hopeful hearts. So, as we picture Finn in these first years, swinging a wooden sword against the setting sun, sharing laughter with Jake under a sky streaked with stars, we see not just a boy, but the quiet start of a legend. The baby in the woods had become the child of the tree fort, and from here his story would only grow wider and deeper, spreading like branches into every corner of Ooo. The final threads of Finn's childhood weave together like the last notes of a lullaby. He was still just a boy, but already the patterns of his life were forming. In every story told about those early days, one truth shines quietly beneath the surface. Finn was never meant to remain small. The world itself seemed to lean toward him, nudging him forward, testing him, and watching how he would respond. In time, the playful days of chasing shadows and sparring with wooden swords began to blend into something more. Ooo is a land of whimsy, but it is also a land of danger. Monsters roamed its forests, ancient ruins whispered with unease, and darker forces stirred beneath the surface. Finn's first encounters with these dangers were not grand battles, but they left impressions nonetheless. Perhaps it was a wolf that wandered too close to the tree fort, or a strange creature lurking in the night. Each time, Finn's instinct was the same, to stand firm even when afraid. His bravery was not born of power or confidence, but of heart. He was a boy who could be frightened and still refuse to run. The lessons from Joshua and Margaret continued to echo. Joshua's tales of facing enemies head-on filled Finn's mind with images of courage. Margaret's gentle reminders to be kind, to think before acting, softened those images with compassion. This balance would guide him in ways he would not recognize until much later. Even in moments where anger or fear might have overtaken another child, Finn often chose to listen, to help, or to forgive. His heart was as much his weapon as any sword he carried. Of course, Jake was still always near. The two brothers grew together, and though their powers were worlds apart, their souls moved in rhythm. When Jake stretched into outlandish shapes, Finn would cheer, clapping his hands with delight. When Finn scraped his knee or felt discouraged, Jake would stretch into a hammock or a protective shield, reminding him that they were in everything together. Childhood for Finn was never lonely, even if he was the only human. Jake's presence filled the gaps left by absent parents, weaving joy into every day. As Finn approached the threshold between childhood and adolescence, his play took on sharper edges. Wooden swords gave way to sturdier ones, sometimes scavenged from ruins or gifted by kind strangers. The games of make-believe began to blur with the reality of defending Ooo, for even in his earliest quests, he proved himself willing to act when others hesitated. Villagers and kingdoms began to take notice of the boy who never turned away. He became, little by little, a figure of hope. There is a certain tenderness in imagining these early acts of heroism. Finn, perhaps no taller than a candy person's shoulder, charging into danger with his little blade, shouting in a voice still touched by youth. The threats may have been small compared to what he would face later, but they were real to him, and he gave his whole heart to meeting them. Each small victory added to his story, each scar a mark of his growing resolve. In the quiet spaces of his mind, though, questions remained. Who were his real parents? Why had they left him? Were there other humans somewhere beyond the horizon? These thoughts drifted in and out of his heart, never fully answered. Yet rather than let them weigh him down, Finn channeled that uncertainty into action. If he could not find his past, he could at least shape his future. If he could not know his origin, he could at least decide what kind of human he would become. Sometimes at night, when Jake had already drifted into dreams, Finn would stay awake, watching the stars through the window of the tree fort. He would wonder what lay beyond them, what strange lands or other versions of himself might exist. These musings, though quiet, foreshadowed the journeys he would one day take, into the multiverse, into the heart of cosmic time, into places far beyond the boyhood meadows. But for now, they were only gentle questions, drifting like starlight through his mind. Finn's timeline begins with this paradox, a child both ordinary and extraordinary. He scraped his knees, laughed at silly jokes, and argued with his brother. He also carried the title of the last human, a living reminder of a vanished world. Both truths existed at once, and both shaped him. His humanity did not isolate him. It defined him, giving him the resolve to fight for others who were just as fragile, just as fleeting, even if they were made of candy or fire or magic. By the time his childhood years blended into youth, Finn had already set himself apart. He had declared his vow to help anyone in need. He had faced fear with steady hands. He had loved, laughed, and longed for answers. The baby left in the woods had not only survived, he had grown into a boy whose presence already carried the weight of destiny. As Finn grew older, his adventures stretched farther and wider, pulling him into the very heart of Ooo. What began as small acts of kindness near the tree fort slowly blossomed into deeds that would earn him the title so many would come to know him by, the Hero of Ooo. There is something tender about watching his journey from boyhood into this new stage of life. He was still full of laughter, still chasing games with Jake, but now there was a weight to his steps. The wooden swords of childhood were traded for sturdier blades. His shoulders carried the trust of neighbors, and his heart began to understand the costs of bravery. The Candy Kingdom was often the stage for his earliest quests. Its citizens, sweet and colorful, but often fragile, looked to Finn whenever trouble arose, whether it was a small monster prowling near their homes or some strange magical mishap. Finn was quick to answer the call. His determination to help anyone in need made him not just a visitor in their land, but a guardian. Princess Bubblegum herself began to notice this about him, the way his courage did not falter even when his size or strength should have failed him. And then, of course, there was the Ice King. In these early adventures, the Ice King often loomed as Finn's greatest foe. To the people of Ooo, he was a menace, swooping in to kidnap princesses and sow chaos. To Finn, he He was the perfect outlet for his budding heroism, a villain to chase, a wrong to set right. Again and again, Finn stormed the Ice King's frozen palace, battled through icy traps, and rescued those who had been taken. Each time he returned triumphant, greeted with cheers and gratitude. In those moments, the boy who once swung wooden blades in a meadow was becoming the hero he had always dreamed of being. But if we look deeper, these clashes with the Ice King were never only about victory. They were lessons in persistence, in understanding the nature of enemies, and in glimpsing the complicated layers of the world. For beneath the Ice King's blundering cruelty was a sadness Finn could not yet name. Their rivalry, though comic at times, was the first sign that not every villain was simply evil, and not every battle was simply won. Adventure after adventure, Finn's reputation spread across Ooo. He became the boy who would not turn away, the human who stood where others faltered. Marceline, the vampire queen, saw in him a spark of authenticity and began to share her own time and music with him. BMO, though small and gentle, became his companion in play and reflection, offering both light-hearted joy and quiet comfort. And Princess Bubblegum, though older and wiser, found in Finn a kind of loyalty and bravery that even her intellect could not manufacture. These friendships shaped Finn as much as any battle. They reminded him that being a hero was not only about fighting, it was also about connection, trust, and love. Yet with every victory came deeper challenges. The more Ooo came to rely on Finn, the more he realized that heroism was not a game. There were dangers he could not always predict, and choices that carried real consequences. Saving one person sometimes meant failing another. Protecting a kingdom sometimes meant stepping into conflicts he could not fully understand. And through it all, Finn's heart had to grow to carry not just the thrill of triumph, but the burden of responsibility. One of the most telling details about this stage of his life is how often he faced these challenges with joy. Even in the face of monsters or magical storms, Finn's laughter rang out. He shouted battle cries that were more playful than grim, turning danger into a kind of wild game. This did not mean he took the threats lightly. It meant that he carried his childlike spirit into every battle, refusing to let fear erase his sense of wonder. That resilience, the ability to see adventure even in hardship, is what made him not just a fighter, but a symbol of hope. The world of Ooo was vast and unpredictable. Candy people, flame beings, ice magic, haunted ruins. All of it swirled together in a kaleidoscope of danger and delight. And at the center of it all was Finn, running headlong into every challenge with Jake at his side. Their bond was more than just brotherhood. It was a partnership, one that balanced Finn's unshakable determination with Jake's easygoing wisdom. Together they were unstoppable, their laughter echoing across battlefields and their silhouettes becoming a familiar sight in every corner of Ooo. In this stage of his life, Finn truly stepped into his role as the hero of Ooo, not because he was the strongest or the most magical, but because he was the most steadfast. When others hesitated, Finn leapt forward. When others despaired, Finn refused to give up. And though he was still only a boy, his spirit carried the weight of a legend already beginning to unfold. Everywhere Finn went, his name began to ripple out in quiet waves. In small villages, scattered across Ooo, stories spread of the human boy who braved monsters and stood up to villains. For the Candy people, who often lived in fragile peace, he became more than just a helper. He was a symbol that, even in a land of magic and uncertainty, there was someone willing to fight for what was right. These days were filled with variety. One morning, Finn and Jake might be chasing down the Ice King after another misguided attempt to kidnap a princess. The next evening, they might be helping rebuild Candy homes after a storm, or wandering into the Fire Kingdom where the air shimmered with heat. Each adventure brought something new, and with each one, Finn's spirit stretched wider. He was no longer simply reacting to problems. He was seeking them out, eager to test himself, eager to prove that he could truly make a difference. His friendship with the Princess Bubblegum deepened during this time, though it was layered with complexity. She was centuries older, wiser, and burdened with responsibilities that Finn could barely grasp. Yet in his youthful honesty, she found a kind of purity that reminded her of simpler times. To Finn, Bubblegum was the embodiment of what he wanted to protect: intelligence, kindness, and beauty. He admired her deeply, even as their bond carried undertones of tension and longing. For a boy becoming a hero, such feelings were as much a challenge as any sword fight. Marceline, too, became a guiding presence. The vampire queen was playful, mischievous, and far older than she let on, but she recognized in Finn a kindred spirit. Together they shared music, laughter, and adventures that revealed new sides of themselves. Marceline's songs, often tinged with sorrow and memory, gave Finn glimpses into a kind of depth he had not yet known. She reminded him that even heroes carry sadness, and that to feel deeply is not a weakness, but a strength. And then there was BMO, who filled their home with both companionship and wonder. Though small and gentle, BMO's stories, games, and childlike wisdom softened Finn's heart after long days of battle. For every quest that tested his bravery, there were evenings when BMO's songs lulled him into a calm, reminding him that life was not only about fighting, it was also about play, about family, about simple joys. But being the hero of Ooo was not only joy and friendship. It also brought Finn face to face with truths that were heavier than he could have imagined as a child. Not every villain was purely evil. Not every battle could be neatly won. The Ice King, once a figure of pure menace in Finn's eyes, began to reveal cracks in his icy facade. Finn still fought him fiercely, but somewhere in those battles, he began to notice the loneliness that haunted Simon beneath the crown. It was confusing, even frustrating, to face an enemy who also seemed like a tragic soul in need of help. This stage of Finn's life was filled with such contradictions. One day he might feel triumphant, hailed as a hero by grateful citizens. The next, he might lie awake in the tree fort, wondering if he truly understood the world he was trying to save. These questions did not weaken him. They stretched him, pushing him to grow beyond the black and white ideals of childhood into a deeper, more thoughtful heroism. And still, the land itself seemed to test him. Ooo is not a gentle place. It is vibrant and whimsical, but its beauty is laced with danger. Finn faced shape-shifting monsters, haunted ruins, and ancient curses. He confronted trials that would have broken many, yet his heart never faltered. Even when fear clenched at him, he pushed forward, not for glory, but for the people who needed him. That is what made him the hero of Ooo, not strength alone, but devotion. Jake remained his anchor. Where Finn charged forward, Jake reminded him to slow down, to laugh, to see the humor even in the darkest situations. Jake's wisdom was casual, almost lazy at times, but it often cut to the truth. He balanced Finn's burning determination with perspective, ensuring that Finn did not lose himself entirely in the weight of responsibility. Their bond was more than brotherhood. It was a living partnership that shaped the very rhythm of their days. Through these years, Finn was still young, still full of light. His laughter echoed even in battle. His declarations of victory were loud and joyful, like a child announcing his triumph in a game. And yet beneath that joy, he was becoming something more. The boy who once dreamed of being a hero was now living that dream, and in doing so, he was discovering both the sweetness and the sorrow that came with it. As the nights deepened over Ooo, Finn's legend grew. His silhouette, often seen alongside Jake's stretching form, became a beacon of safety, and in the quiet of bedtime reflection, we can see him clearly, a boy with a sword at his side, standing tall in the moonlight, heart wide open to whatever the world might ask of him. The title of hero is not something one claims for themselves. It is something given slowly, through the eyes of others. For Finn, that title emerged not from a single grand act, but from countless small ones, rescuing a princess from the Ice King's clutches, standing between villagers and a rampaging beast, helping strangers rebuild their homes after misfortune. Over time, these acts gathered like stones, building the foundation of his reputation until even kingdoms that had never met him knew the name of the boy in the blue shirt. Yet Finn never sought recognition. To him, each adventure was simply the right thing to do. When someone cried out for help, he responded. When danger loomed, he stepped forward. His sense of morality was direct and unshaken. If he had the ability to help, he must. The clarity so rare in the shifting tides of Ooo made him both trusted and beloved. His relationship with the Ice King continued to evolve, providing Finn with challenges not only of strength but of empathy. Time and again, Finn stormed the icy palace, sword in hand, demanding the release of kidnapped princesses. These confrontations often ended in victory, yet behind the triumph lingered unease. For as Finn began to notice, the Ice King's antics were not born solely of cruelty. They were rooted in loneliness, confusion, and a broken crown that twisted the man within. At first, Finn resisted this realization, clinging to the simplicity of good versus evil. But as he grew, he couldn't ignore the sorrow that seeped through his rival's laughter. This recognition marked a turning point. Heroism was no longer just swinging a sword or shouting a battle cry. It was learning to see beyond appearances, to glimpse the pain behind an enemy's eyes. Finn began to understand that saving Ooo was not always about defeating villains. Sometimes it was about listening, forgiving, or carrying the weight of compassion even when it hurt. The friendships that surrounded him deepened these lessons. With Princess Bubblegum, Finn wrestled with admiration that bordered on love, even as their connection remained complex. She respected his bravery, trusted his loyalty, but also saw the gap between his youthful heart and her centuries of experience. For Finn, every word from her carried meaning, every smile a glimpse of something he longed for. Their bond taught him both the sweetness of devotion and the ache of distance. With Marceline, Finn found a different kind of connection. She drew him into her world of music and memory, exposing him to emotions that could not be solved with the sword. Her songs often carried sorrow, fragments of a history that weighed on her. And Finn learned to sit with that sadness without trying to fix it. From Marceline, he learned that a hero is not always a savior. Sometimes a hero's simply a friend who listens. And BMO, ever gentle and playful, reminded him of the innocence within himself. In BMO's world, even the simplest game became a grand adventure. After long days of quests and battles, BMO's stories grounded Finn, reminding him that joy was not something to be earned, but something to be shared. As the seasons passed, Finn's challenges grew. He faced not only monsters, but moral dilemmas, a choice between saving one life or many, a realization that not every conflict had a clear right or wrong. These moments stretched his heart in ways that no training could prepare him for. He began to carry the quiet burden of knowing that heroism often meant sacrifice, and that sometimes victory did not feel like triumph. And yet through it all, his spirit never dimmed. When others saw obstacles, Finn saw opportunities. Where others hesitated, he leapt. His laughter still rang out even in danger, transforming fear into something manageable, reminding those around him that light could exist even in the darkest moments. This joy was not naive, it was resilient, a conscious choice to hold on to hope no matter what Ooo threw his way. The land itself seemed to embrace him. From the bubbling fields of the Candy Kingdom to the shadowy depths of dungeons, Finn's presence became familiar. He was not simply a wanderer. He was part of the rhythm of Ooo, woven into its stories, spoken of in whispers around campfires. For the Candy people, he was safety. For Marceline, he was companionship. For Bubblegum, he was loyalty. And for Jake, he was family, inseparable and eternal. Finn's timeline in this stage reminds us that heroism is not forged overnight. It is shaped by 1,000 small choices, by laughter shared with friends, by enemies faced and forgiven, by the simple act of showing up when no one else will. The boy who once swung wooden swords in a meadow was now a true hero, not because of power, but because of heart. And as he stood beneath the moonlight, sword resting against his shoulder, Jake by his side, the world seemed to know it. The hero of Ooo was no longer just a dream in a child's imagination. It was reality, unfolding step by step, night by night, across the strange and wondrous land he called home. Heroism is often painted as glory, but for Finn it was simply the fabric of daily life. His days followed no script, yet always carried the same thread: someone in need, and a boy who answered. Sometimes it was grand, like defending the Candy Kingdom against invasion. Other times it was as simple as helping a lost creature find its way home. Both mattered equally to him. Both were part of his vow, spoken as a child and lived out now with every step. What is striking in this part of Finn's story is how Ooo itself began to reflect his presence. Kingdoms that once stood apart from one another started to see in him a common protector. The Flame Kingdom, the Candy Kingdom, even the icy spires of the north, all came to know the human who carried no crown, but bore a heart large enough to bridge their worlds. In a land fragmented by war and magic, Finn's bravery was a unifying force. And yet, even as the title of Hero of Ooo rested on his shoulders, Finn never lost the softness at his core. He remained the boy who laughed in battle, who shared silly jokes with Jake, who treated every creature, be it candy person, vampire, or machine, as worthy of dignity. The blend of playfulness and courage is what made him unique. He was not a distant knight in shining armor. He was a friend, a neighbor, a companion who simply happened to wield a sword. The adventures of this era also deepened Finn's understanding of himself. Facing magical curses, haunted dungeons, and the schemes of trickster beings, he began to glimpse how vast Ooo truly was. He met beings far older and more powerful than himself, yet he never shrank away. Instead, each encounter added to his perspective, reminding him that being human was not a weakness. It was a strength, a grounding force in a world of chaos. He could bleed, he could falter, but he could also choose, and in that choice lay his greatest power. The bond with Jake remained the foundation beneath it all. Time and again, their teamwork saved them, their trust unshaken even in the face of danger. When Finn's determination pushed him too far, Jake steadied him. When Jake's easygoing nature tempted him toward laziness, Finn spurred him forward. Together they balanced one another, each incomplete without the other. The Hero of Ooo was never just Finn. It was Finn and Jake, two halves of a whole. But even bonds so strong were tested. As Finn matured, he began to feel the pull of independence. He wrestled with the questions of who he was beyond his brother, beyond the title of hero. These stirrings would later grow louder, but even in these early days, they appeared in quiet moments. When Finn wandered alone through ruins, or when he lingered on the balcony of the tree fort after Jake had already gone to sleep. The seeds of self-discovery were being planted, even as the world still saw him simply as their champion. Perhaps the most poignant part of this stage is the way Finn's innocence began to brush against the edges of reality. He still laughed, still shouted his battle cries with joy, but he also began to recognize the complexity of the world around him. The Ice King's loneliness, Marceline's melancholy, Bubblegum's burdens, these were glimpses into truths that could not be solved with courage alone. They reminded Finn that to be a hero was not to fix everything, but to walk alongside others in their struggles, to stand with them in both light and shadow. As Finn returned from the vastness of stars and multiverses, his life in Ooo carried a new kind of weight. The lessons of eternity were still within him, but now the trials he faced became more intimate, more personal. The cosmic had stretched his spirit, yet it was in the quiet turns of his own world that the end of his childhood truly began. These were years marked not by endless expansion, but by farewells. Friends grew older, kingdoms shifted, and Finn himself began to realize that the boyhood he had clung to could not last forever. Change, once something he charged into with a grin, now arrived as something slower, heavier, a truth he could not fight with the sword. One of the deepest trials of this time was watching Jake change. Finn's brother, his anchor since the days of the tree fort cradle, began to carry the quiet signs of aging. Jake's fur grew softer, his movements slower, his wisdom tinged with the knowledge that time does not stretch endlessly, even for those who can bend their bodies in impossible ways. For Finn, this was perhaps the hardest truth to bear, that even the bonds that had shaped him from birth were not untouched by the passing of years. Their adventures continued, of course. Finn and Jake still chased mysteries, fought monsters, and wandered through the colorful kingdoms of Ooo. But beneath the laughter was an awareness that each journey could not last forever. Finn began to look at his brother with new eyes, cherishing every moment, even as he feared the day those moments would end. Childhood, after all, is not just about innocence. It is about believing that the people you love will always be there. And now, that belief was fading. Around them, Ooo itself shifted. The kingdom stirred with unrest, alliances wavered, and conflicts grew more complex than simple battles between good and evil. Finn found himself standing not only as a fighter, but as a mediator, a voice of compassion in wars that threatened to consume those he loved. The Gum War, a clash that pitted friends against one another, tested him in ways that no cosmic trial ever had. For here, the enemy was not some dark being from beyond. It was those he had once laughed with, those he had once protected. Princess Bubblegum and her kingdom stood on one side, Gumball and his ambitions on the other. Finn, caught between them, had to face the painful truth that loyalty was not enough to solve every conflict. To love both sides meant to risk losing both. To fight for peace meant to accept that no victory would leave everyone whole. In this crucible, Finn's heroism was tested not by how well he swung his sword, but by how deeply he understood the hearts of others. Even victories carried a sense of farewell. As wars quieted, as kingdoms settled into uneasy truces, Finn could not shake the awareness that the Ooo he had grown up in was changing. The tree fort, once a symbol of carefree days, now stood as a reminder of years gone by. Friends drifted into their own paths, their own responsibilities, leaving Finn to face the loneliness of transition. He was no longer the boy who simply charged into adventure. He was a young man standing at the edge of adulthood, carrying both triumph and grief. And yet, through every trial, Finn's spirit endured. His laughter was softer now, tinged with reflection, but it was still there. His courage no longer came from the innocence of believing he could fix everything, but from the wisdom of knowing that some things could only be endured. This was the true end of his childhood. Not the loss of joy, but the transformation of it into something quieter, steadier, more resilient. In bedtime stillness, we can picture him at this stage, sitting by a campfire with Jake, and the flames flickering against their faces. The silence between them is no longer empty. It is filled with memory, with unspoken love, with the bittersweet awareness that nothing lasts forever. And in that silence, Finn's journey into the end of childhood unfolds, not with a sudden break, but with a gentle fading of one season into the next. The gum war loomed as one of the clearest signs that the days of simple quests had passed. Finn, once eager to throw himself into any fight, now found himself searching for ways to prevent battle rather than fuel it. He had learned too much about loss, too much about the weight of scars, to believe that victory alone was enough. What mattered was peace, and peace was always more fragile than any kingdom. He stood between Princess Bubblegum and Gumball, trying to bridge a rift that had widened beyond reason. It was a conflict rooted in family, in history, in choices made long before Finn had even been born. For a boy who had grown up thinking monsters were the enemy, it was sobering to realize that sometimes the greatest dangers came not from beasts or curses, but from pride and stubbornness within those you cared for. Finn's solution was not perfect. His voice could not erase centuries of mistrust, nor could his compassion undo the weight of power and ambition. Yet, his attempt mattered. It reminded both sides that war was not destiny. The choice was always possible, even in the shadow of violence. And though the war did not vanish as he wished, Finn's presence softened its edge. His insistence on empathy planted seeds that others could not ignore. This was the shape of his heroism now, no longer the simple joy of charging into danger, but the quiet strength of seeking peace where others saw only battle. It was harder, more painful, and often thankless. Yet it revealed the depth of who Finn had become. He was no longer defined by victory, but by the way he carried the world's burdens with grace. Jake remained his companion through all of it, though their bond, too, carried the marks of change. Where once Jake had been the carefree guide, now Finn often found himself reflecting with a maturity that even surprised his brother. They had grown together, each shaping the other, but they were no longer the children who tumbled through meadows with wooden swords. Their laughter still echoed, but beneath it was the knowledge that time was passing, and that nothing, not even the strongest bond, could remain untouched forever. Finn also began to confront his own mortality more directly during this time. His battles had left scars, his heart had carried heartbreak, and now he saw clearly that being human meant limits. He could not live forever like Bubblegum. He could not stretch beyond age like Jake. He could not turn sorrow into song for centuries like Marceline. His life, precious and fleeting, was measured in a span far shorter than those he loved. Rather than despair at this truth, Finn embraced it. He began to see that the brevity of human life gave it meaning. Every moment mattered, because there would not be endless tomorrows. And so he lived with presence. He cherished the quiet hours in the tree fort, the playful banter with BMO, the occasional visits with Marceline where songs drifted through the night. He carried these moments as treasures, knowing that they were finite. Childhood had once been about imagining the future as endless. Now, adulthood began with realizing that every day was a gift to be lived fully. The changes in Ooo reflected Finn's own transformation. Kingdoms that had once seemed eternal began to shift. The Candy Kingdom faced unrest. The Fire Kingdom sought new paths, and the balance between all of Oo's peoples was fragile. Finn, once content to be a sword at the ready, now found himself as something else, a bridge, a voice, a reminder that peace was worth striving for, even when it seemed impossible. And yet, through all of this, his spirit did not dim. He laughed still, though softer. He played still, though more thoughtfully. He faced danger still, though with eyes that carried the weight of memory. The end of childhood did not mean the end of joy. It meant the deepening of it, the recognition that even fleeting happiness was worth everything. In bedtime reflection, picture Finn standing in the fields outside the Candy Kingdom as twilight settles over the horizon. The war has ended, the kingdoms are quiet for now, and the sky glows with fading light. He exhales, weary but steady, his eyes carrying both sorrow and hope. Childhood has slipped behind him, yet the flame of his humanity burns brighter than ever, guiding him into the uncertain nights ahead. As the seasons turned, Finn found himself moving through a world that seemed to be saying goodbye in small, quiet ways. The tree fort remained his home, yet it no longer felt like the carefree cradle of boyhood. Its walls, once filled with endless laughter, now echoed with memory. Every mark on its wood, every trinket collected on its shelves, seemed to whisper stories of days gone by. Childhood lingered there like an old song, sweet and familiar but fading. Farewells came in many forms. Some were gentle, like friends drifting into new paths. Marceline, though still close, began to spend more time reflecting on her own past, her songs carrying a tone that Finn now understood with a depth he never had as a boy. Bubblegum, burdened by leadership, stood taller as a ruler and further from the innocent object of Finn's devotion. Even Jake, though always at Finn's side, showed signs that their partnership was shifting. He had a family of his own now, children to guide, and a legacy to think about. For Finn, these changes were subtle reminders that time does not pause, not even for the strongest bonds. The Great Gum War had shown him the fragility of kingdoms. Now, in the aftermath, he also saw the fragility of friendships. They were not breaking, they were evolving. But for Finn, who had once clung to the certainty of childhood companionship, even evolution felt like loss. He began to sense that life was not about holding things as they were, but about learning to let them grow and change, even if that meant stepping into unknown spaces alone. These farewells prepared him for the final trials of this stage. Trials not of cosmic grandeur, but of deeply human endings. The final episodes of his childhood unfolded not in distant realms, but in the heart of Ooo itself as the kingdoms faced the possibility of destruction. The Great Gum War threatened everything Finn held dear, and though he fought bravely, he came to understand that not all endings were tragedies. Some endings were simply transitions, the closing of one chapter before the opening of another. In the climactic moments, Finn's role was not to defeat a villain in battle, but to remind Ooo of peace. He stood not as a conqueror, but as a mediator, a symbol of the compassion he had grown into. The boy who once charged headlong with a sword now stood with open hands, speaking not only for himself, but for everyone who longed for harmony. This was not the triumph of a child's imagination. It was the wisdom of someone who had grown into himself through loss, heartbreak, and endurance. And when the dust settled, when the war was over, and Ooo stood quiet once more, Finn was left not with the thrill of victory, but with the awareness that childhood had ended. The world was different now, and so was he. The adventures would not stop, but they would no longer carry the same innocent glow. He was no longer simply the hero of Ooo. He was Finn, a young man standing on the threshold of adulthood. The finale of these years came in a way both grand and gentle. Music filled the air, voices rose together, and the land itself seemed to exhale. The song that carried through Ooo was not only about victory, it was about cycles, about endings and beginnings, about the truth that even when childhood fades, life continues. Finn listened, and in that melody he heard his own story reflected back to him. What makes this part of his timeline so tender is that it does not end with conquest. It ends with acceptance. Acceptance that friends grow, that bonds change, that kingdoms rise and fall, that childhood must give way to something new. For Finn, the hardest battles were not with monsters or magic, but with the passage of time itself. And though he could not stop it, he embraced it with the same courage he had shown in every quest. In bedtime stillness, we can picture him walking through the fields of Ooo as twilight settles. The war is over, the world is quiet, and he carries no crown, no title, only himself, shaped by years of trial and farewell. His steps are slower now, more thoughtful, yet steady. The horizon before him glows with the soft promise of a new chapter. Childhood has ended, but the story is far from over. The end of childhood is rarely marked by a single moment. It arrives in fragments, an old joke that no longer feels as funny, a place once filled with laughter now quiet with memory, a friendship that shifts into something new. For Finn, these fragments gathered slowly until one day he realized that the boy he had been was already behind him. One of the most poignant of these farewells was with Jake. Though their bond remained unshaken, it began to stretch into new shapes. Jake's children grew, his responsibilities deepened, and Finn could feel the subtle pull of distance. It was not a distance of love, but of time. Jake would always be his brother, his closest companion. But Finn knew that the carefree days of endless adventures together were drawing to a close. He watched Jake lean into his role as a father, and for the first time, Finn felt himself standing apart, not left behind, but moving into his own path. Even BMO, once the embodiment of childhood joy, became a symbol of change. The little console still played games and sang songs, but Finn now heard in those games an echo of the simpler days they had shared. What once was pure play now carried the sweetness of nostalgia. BMO had not changed, Finn had. And in that realization lay the quiet truth that childhood was truly ending. The gum war had been resolved, but it left behind a world scarred, altered, fragile. Finn could not look at Ooo without seeing both the beauty and the cracks. He knew now that every kingdom was a story of rise and fall, that nothing remained untouched by time. Yet rather than despair, he embraced it. The endings no longer frightened him. They were part of the rhythm of life, and his role was not to resist them, but to carry them with grace. Perhaps the clearest farewell came in the final song, when the kingdoms and their people, once divided, lifted their voices together. Finn stood among them, no longer a boy dreaming of being a hero, but a young man who had lived that dream, suffered its costs, and discovered its deeper meaning. The melody that spread across Ooo was not one of triumph, but of acceptance. Acceptance of endings, of change, of the truth that even the sweetest days must pass. In that moment, Finn felt the weight of his entire childhood settle upon him. The wooden swords, the endless adventures with Jake, the laughter, the heartbreak, the scars, all of it had shaped him, prepared him, carried him here. He did not mourn the end. He honored it, knowing that every farewell was also an opening to something new. And when the final notes of that song drifted into silence, Finn stepped forward into his future with steady feet. His story was not over, but his childhood was. The boy who had once swung at shadows in the meadows, who had once believed that love and laughter would last forever, had grown into someone who understood the fragility of all things and chose to cherish them all the more for it. The tree fort still stood, a reminder of beginnings, but now it was also a monument to memory. Finn no longer saw it only as a place of games and laughter. He saw it as the foundation upon which he had built himself. He could leave it now, not because he had outgrown it, but because he carried it within him wherever he went. And so as the sun set on this chapter, Finn walked with quiet confidence. He carried scars and memories, losses and joys, farewells and promises. He carried the end of childhood, and with it, the beginning of something greater, a deeper understanding of himself, of others, of the fragile, fleeting beauty of life. In bedtime stillness, we can picture him one last time at this threshold. Standing on a hill with Jake beside him, the fields of Ooo stretching out into twilight. The light fades, but his eyes do not dim. Childhood is ended, but his story shines brighter than ever, ready to step into the unknown dawn of what comes next. When the echoes of childhood had faded, and the trials of youth had shaped him, Finn's journey did not end. It carried onward beyond the familiar meadows of Ooo into years that were quieter but no less meaningful. This final stage is not about battles or heartbreaks, but about what remains when the adventures slow down, when the world turns, and when a life once filled with endless quests begins to find its place in history. Finn Beyond Ooo is the story of legacy. It is the tale of what happens when a boy who was once the last human grows into a man whose mark lingers across kingdoms, across stories, even across generations. The episodes and glimpses of this era are scattered, appearing in fragments from distant lands and other reflections, but together they paint a picture of someone who never stopped growing. In these later years, Finn leaves the tree fort behind. The home that cradled his childhood and his youth becomes a place of memory rather than a daily shelter. This departure is not marked by sorrow, but by a quiet sense of readiness. The tree fort had given him everything: laughter, companionship, family, even the foundations of his identity. Carrying all of that within himself, Finn was ready to walk beyond its wooden walls and step into the wider horizon. We see glimpses of him grown, taller, broader, his voice carrying the calm steadiness of someone who has walked through loss and come out the other side. His eyes, once filled only with the bright spark of curiosity, now hold something deeper, a wisdom born of scars, a peace found only after years of wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. He still carries the same spirit, still the same Finn, but now shaped by time into something gentler and more enduring. His adventures did not cease completely. Even as an older man, Finn continued to wander, to help where he was needed, to lend his hand to those who could not stand alone. Yet these quests were different from the exuberant charges of his youth. They were steadier, more deliberate, carried out with the calmness of someone who no longer needed to prove himself. Finn had already shown Ooo who he was. Now he lived simply as himself, human, hero, friend. Oh, the presence of Jake still lingered in his life, though their paths took different turns. Jake's later years carried him in directions Finn could not always follow, and eventually the hardest farewell came when Jake passed beyond. For Finn, this loss was unlike any before. His brother, his other half, His anchor since infancy was gone, and yet, in the quiet sorrow that followed, Finn did not break. He carried Jake's memory as part of himself, a flame that continued to warm him in the coldest nights. Farewell had become part of his story long ago, but this farewell carved the deepest mark. Still, Finn walked on. He honored Jake by continuing the path they had shared, by living with joy even in solitude, by smiling at the memories rather than sinking into despair. This resilience defined Finn beyond Ooo more than any quest. He had faced monsters and cosmic horrors, but now he faced the most human trial of all, living fully after the loss of those you love. In bedtime stillness, picture Finn as an older man, standing on a cliffside above the sea. The wind tugs at his cloak, the waves crash below, and the sky burns with the colors of sunset. His sword rests at his side, though he no longer grips it tightly. He gazes out at the horizon, not with longing for adventure, but with gratitude for the journey he has already walked. Childhood is behind him, but life remains, steady and rich with memory. As the years flowed on, Finn's story became less about being the hero of Ooo and more about being Finn the human. That title, so simple and plain, carried a power of its own. In a land of magic, candy folk, vampires, and flame beings, Finn's humanity was always what made him different. And now, as he grew older, it became what made him timeless. He never sought a throne, nor did he cling to power or fame. Instead, his life beyond Ooo was marked by quiet wandering, by being a presence wherever he was needed. Sometimes he was a mentor to the young, teaching them how to hold a sword or how to face fear with steady hands. Sometimes he was simply a companion, helping rebuild homes, listening to stories, or offering comfort to those who felt alone. In every small act, he carried forward the vow he had made as a boy, to help anyone in need, no matter what. The kingdoms of Ooo remembered him, not only for his battles, but for these gestures of compassion. In the Candy Kingdom, children grew up hearing tales of Finn's bravery, but also of his kindness. The times he stayed behind to help rebuild after storms, the times he comforted those who mourned, the times he chose peace over violence. To them, he was not a distant legend. He was a friend who had walked among them, who had shared their struggles and joys. Marceline remained part of his life, her centuries stretching far beyond his own, yet she carried his memory in ways that gave her songs new depth. To her, Finn was a reminder that even short-lived lives could shine as brightly as the sun. Their friendship endured, steady and unshaken, a thread of constancy even as the years slipped by. In her music, Finn's story lived on, softened into melodies that drifted through the night like lullabies for the land. Princess Bubblegum, too, never forgot the boy who had once stood by her side with unwavering loyalty. Though her duties as a ruler stretched endlessly, she often looked to Finn as a reminder of what it meant to care not for kingdoms, but for people. His humanity grounded her, reminding her that leadership was not only about logic or science, but about love. Finn himself carried no need for recognition. His joy came from living in the moment, from waking each day with the intention to do good, from finding peace in the simple rhythms of life. After years of heartbreak and loss, he had grown into a man who found beauty in small things. The warmth of sunlight on his face, the laughter of children, the comfort of sitting by a fire at night. These were the treasures of Finn beyond Ooo. The world around him continued to change. New kingdoms rose, old ones faded, and Ooo itself shifted like a living story, always moving, always transforming. Yet Finn remained a constant presence, a thread woven through its fabric. Even as the details of his adventures faded into legend, the essence of who he was endured. He was not remembered only as a warrior, but as a human who cared, who laughed, who chose again and again to protect life even when the odds were impossible. And perhaps this is what made Finn's later years so profound. He no longer needed to prove himself. The boy who had once longed to be a hero had become one, not through victory alone, but through the simple act of living with courage and love. The end of childhood had brought him into this truth, that being human, fragile and fleeting, was itself a kind of heroism. In bedtime stillness, imagine him walking through the meadows of Ooo in his later years. The grass sways softly in the breeze. The sky is wide and blue, and his steps are calm and steady. He does not rush. He does not carry the urgency of youth. He walks with the peace of someone who has lived fully, who has faced the cosmic and the personal, who has said farewell to childhood and found meaning in what lies beyond. As Finn grew older, he began to notice the subtle ways the world remembered him, even while he was still alive. Children of Ooo played games where they took on his name, swinging sticks as swords and shouting his catchphrases with bright laughter. Merchants told stories of the human who saved the land as they passed goods along the roads. Even the smallest creatures in the forests, who once scurried at the sound of battle, seemed to know that the presence of Finn meant safety. His legend, once only whispered in corners, had become part of Oo's heartbeat. But unlike the distant myths of cosmic beings, Finn's legacy remained grounded in the personal. He was not remembered as untouchable, not worshipped as flawless. His story was told with all its imperfections, the heartbreaks, the scars, the moments of failure alongside the moments of triumph. And it was in that honesty that people found comfort. For Finn's humanity reminded them that even ordinary lives, filled with mistakes and loss, could still be extraordinary. Jake's passing remained the deepest mark on this part of his journey. The day came quietly, without spectacle, without the grand battles that had once defined their youth. Jake's life, long and full, came to its natural close. For Finn, the silence that followed was heavier than any cosmic void. The brother who had been by his side from the very beginning, who had shaped his laughter, guided his growth, and shared every adventure, was gone. Yet even in grief, Finn did not collapse. He chose to carry Jake's memory as a presence rather than an absence. Every joke told, every smile shared, every moment of kindness became a way of keeping Jake alive within him. In the years that followed, Finn often found himself speaking of Jake when guiding others. To young adventurers eager to prove themselves, he would share not only the stories of their victories, but the lessons Jake had taught him. That laughter was as important as courage, that kindness was as powerful as strength, that friendship was the greatest magic of all. Through these stories, Jake's spirit lived on, woven into the fabric of Ooo just as surely as Finn's. Marceline, ageless and eternal, remained a companion through it all. For her, watching Finn age was bittersweet. She had seen countless lives pass, countless friends fade into memory. Yet Finn's presence was different. His humanity, fleeting though it was, carried a brilliance that she cherished deeply. In her song, she poured the ache of watching him grow older, but also the gratitude of having shared those years. Together, they became reminders to Ooo that mortality was not a curse, but a gift, that to live briefly was to live brightly. Princess Bubblegum, too, honored Finn's path in her own way. Though she would endure for centuries, she often looked to him as the measure of what it meant to care. She, who had known so much loss, carried Finn's example as a reminder that leadership was not only about knowledge or power, it was about compassion. about standing beside others even in their darkest hours. In quiet ways, she ensured that his name remained spoken in the halls of her kingdom. And yet, through all this remembrance, Finn never sought glory. His joy was still found in small things: a warm drink shared by the fire, the laughter of friends, the stillness of twilight settling over the meadows. For a boy who had once chased adventure endlessly, the greatest adventure of his later years was learning to simply be, to live not for conquest, but for peace. He wandered sometimes beyond Ooo into lands less familiar, carrying with him the same open heart that had once saved kingdoms. These journeys were not marked by epic battles, but by quiet acts of kindness, helping strangers, guiding lost travelers, sharing stories of the days when the world seemed brighter. To those he met, he was not a hero of legend, but a gentle man whose presence made the world lighter. In bedtime stillness, imagine Finn seated on the edge of a quiet dock, his feet trailing in the water, the moon reflected in ripples across the lake. He hummed softly to himself, a song Marceline once sang, his voice steady though touched with age. Around him, the night is peaceful. He is no longer the restless boy desperate for adventure. He is a man at peace with his story, content to let the world turn without his constant striving. This is Finn beyond Ooo, not the hero charging into battle, but the human who has found harmony with himself, with others, and with the endless passage of time. As the seasons of his life continued, Finn's story grew softer, like the fading notes of a lullaby that linger in the air long after the song has ended. The days of battles and quests, of swords raised high and kingdoms saved, became stories told by others. Children whispered them under blankets at night. Adventurers repeated them in hushed tones around campfires, and bards wove them into songs that drifted through the meadows of Ooo. Finn's life had become a legend, not because it was perfect, but because it was deeply human. He had once been the last human child, found on a leaf in the woods, raised by magic dogs, and destined to wander a land of candy folk and monsters. That boy had grown into a hero, then into a man, and finally into a symbol. Not a symbol of power or divinity, but of the simple truth that kindness, courage, and love could endure even in a world shaped by apocalypse. In his later years, Finn carried this truth quietly. His hair turned silver, his steps slowed, but his heart never wavered. He laughed still, softer but no less sincere. He cared still, offering help even when his body no longer carried the strength of youth. He lived not for conquest or for recognition, but for the steady joy of being present, of seeing another sunrise, of sharing one more story. Those who met him in these years often did not realize they stood before a legend. To them he was simply a kind man, weathered but bright-eyed, who listened with patience and offered words that seemed to carry more weight than they should. Only later, when his name was spoken, did they realize they had shared a moment with the Hero of Ooo. For Finn, that was enough. The story no longer belonged to him, it belonged to the world. When at last the final farewell came, it was not marked by battle or song, but by peace. Finn's life ended as it had been lived, gently, with love. Marceline's songs carried his memory into the centuries beyond. Bubblegum's kingdom remembered him as the heart that had once held the world together. And across Ooo, in every kingdom, his story lingered, not as a distant myth, but as a human truth. Jake was gone, but never absent. Finn carried him always, and in the end, it felt as if they had walked together to the very last horizon. The bond between them, unbroken even by death, became part of the legend itself. When children of later generations imagined Finn, they often pictured Jake beside him, the two of them laughing as they had always done. And so Finn's story rests in the hearts of those who remember him, not only as a hero, but as a brother, a friend, a boy who grew into a man and showed that even in a broken world, goodness could endure. He was proof that humanity, fragile and fleeting, was still enough to shape destiny, to resist the void, to leave behind something eternal. In bedtime stillness, picture him one final time, standing at the edge of a golden meadow, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in the shades of rose and amber. The wind carries the faint sound of laughter, a memory of Jake's voice. Finn smiles, his sword resting lightly in his hand, his eyes soft with peace. Ahead lies the horizon, endless and welcoming. He steps forward, not into battle, not into sorrow, but into the gentle embrace of the world he helped save. And with that step, the boy in the woods, the hero of Ooo, the man beyond adventure, becomes part of the timeless story whispered through the ages. His tale, like a lullaby, drifts into silence, leaving behind warmth, comfort, and the reminder that even the smallest life can shine forever. Good night. As Finn entered his teenage years, his story began to take on a different rhythm. The quests and battles did not vanish, but a new kind of challenge rose quietly within him, one that could not be fought with swords or defeated with bravery alone. These were the trials of the heart, the subtle storms of love, loss, and the growing pains of becoming someone older than the boy who once laughed through every fight. The first stirrings came with Princess Bubblegum. From the earliest days, Finn had admired her brilliance, her kindness, her beauty. To him, she was more than just a ruler of the Candy Kingdom. She was the symbol of what he wanted to protect, the ideal of goodness and light in a world filled with strangeness. In those early years, his devotion often seemed simple, almost childlike. He brought her gifts, rushed to her aid at the slightest hint of trouble, and declared his feelings with the pure certainty of youth. But the truth was more complicated. Bubblegum was centuries older, burdened by responsibilities that Finn could scarcely imagine. While she cared deeply for him, her affection was layered with boundaries, with the understanding that their lives were not aligned in the way Finn wished they could be. This difference, though unspoken at first, gradually became clear. For Finn, it was the first taste of longing that did not resolve into triumph, a battle that no sword could win. The ache of this realization left an imprint on him. For the first time, he began to see that not all desires could be fulfilled simply by trying harder. Love, unlike monsters or curses, did not yield to determination alone. It required balance, timing, and sometimes acceptance. These lessons pressed on him like invisible weights, reshaping the way he understood himself and the world. In time, another flame entered his life, this time quite literally. Flame Princess, fierce and radiant, captured his heart in a way that was both thrilling and dangerous. Unlike Bubblegum, Flame Princess was closer to his age, still discovering herself as Finn was. Their connection sparked quickly, full of laughter and fire. Together they tumbled through adventures that felt alive with energy, each moment burning brighter than the last. Yet as with fire itself, their relationship was difficult to contain. Flame Princess carried her own struggles, her own anger and volatility, born from years of isolation in the Fire Kingdom. Finn, with all his good intentions, did not always know how to meet that intensity. Their love was real, but it was also fragile, prone to misunderstandings that grew like cracks in stone. When the bond between them fractured, Finn felt the sharp sting of heartbreak. It was not just a loss of love. It was the loss of the certainty he once carried, the belief that his heart could always guide him to what was right. This heartbreak changed him. It did not make him cold or bitter, but it deepened his perspective. He began to understand that growing older meant carrying both joy and sorrow, that love could uplift and wound in the same breath. These experiences softened him, peeling away the edges of childhood innocence and replacing them with something quieter, more reflective. Even as Finn grappled with matters of the heart, his physical journey mirrored these inner changes. The grass sword, once a simple weapon, became a part of him, binding to his body in ways that cost him dearly. When he lost his arm to its curse, it marked a turning point not just physically, but emotionally. He could no longer deny that his actions carried consequences, that his body and spirit could be scarred by the choices he made. And yet even in loss, Finn found resilience. He adapted, he grew stronger, and he faced the world with the same stubborn hope that had always defined him. But now that hope was tempered with humility. He knew more than ever that life was fragile, relationships were complicated, and being a hero meant bearing not just triumphs, but wounds that never fully healed. In bedtime reflection, it is gentle to picture him during the stage, sitting by a quiet river after a long day, his sword resting at his side, the night air cool against his skin. His eyes no longer held only the bright gleam of adventure. They also carried shadows, the soft weight of lessons learned too soon. Yet even then, beneath the ache of heartbreak and the scar of loss, there remained the same boy who refused to give up. The boy who still believed with all his heart that love and kindness mattered. The days of simple victories faded into seasons where Finn's heart became his greatest battlefield. Love had once seemed like an adventure all its own, a prize to be earned through loyalty and daring. Yet as he grew, he discovered that love was far more intricate. It was not about rescuing or winning, but about understanding. It was about balance, trust, and sometimes the painful act of letting go. His longing for Bubblegum lingered even after he began to accept her distance. She admired his bravery, relied on his loyalty, and shared with him moments of warmth. But she also carried the weight of her kingdom, her science, and her long history. To Finn, this gap became clearer with time. No matter how much he cared for her, there was a part of her world he could not enter. She was a ruler shaped by centuries, and he was still learning what it meant to simply be himself. That realization was painful, yet it nudged him toward growth. He began to see that admiration and love, though connected, were not always the same. With Flame Princess, the lessons were even sharper. Their time together was radiant, filled with passion and laughter, but also fire that burned too hot. Flame Princess struggled with trust, with the weight of her anger, and Finn, though endlessly hopeful, was not always prepared to meet her storms. He wanted to help her heal, to be the hero of her heart. But sometimes his actions backfired, leaving both of them hurt. The collapse of their relationship marked one of the first times Finn felt true heartbreak in its rawest form. For nights, he carried that ache silently, learning that not every wound could be soothed with courage. But heartbreak, while painful, also widened his soul. He began to notice things he had overlooked before. The sadness in Marceline's songs, the loneliness that trailed the Ice King, the quiet resilience of ordinary candy folk. His own loss allowed him to connect with the pain of others more deeply. He no longer saw the world through the clear lens of black and white. It was now tinted with shades of gray, with subtleties that called for compassion as much as courage. The physical trials of this period mirrored the inner ones. The curse of the grass sword bound itself to him, changing not only his battles but his very body. Losing his arm to its power was not just a physical loss. It was symbolic of the cost of growing older. Childhood had been filled with endless renewal. Scraped knees healed overnight. Mistakes faded quickly. But now consequences lingered. Scars remained. The boy who once felt invincible had to accept that even heroes can be broken. And yet, in the midst of these changes, Finn's spirit showed its most resilient light. He did not crumble under the weight of heartbreak or loss. Instead, he grew more thoughtful, more attuned to the world around him. He began to see that strength was not only in swinging a sword, it was also in patience and forgiveness, in learning from mistakes. Each scar, whether on his body or in his heart, became a reminder of his humanity. There were moments of quiet reflection during this stage of his life, moments where Finn simply sat with his thoughts instead of rushing into action. Sitting on the balcony of the tree fort, gazing at the horizon as the sun dipped below the hills, wandering through a meadow, his steps slower than before, his mind heavy with questions. These images show a boy beginning to grow into a young man, learning that being a hero meant more than adventure. It meant carrying both joy and sorrow with equal grace. Even in his darker moments, Finn remained surrounded by bonds that steadied him. Jake, ever his brother and companion, provided comfort with simple words and easy humor. Marceline offered perspective through her songs, teaching him that pain could be transformed into art, into something beautiful. Bubblegum, though distant in love, still cared for him as a trusted ally, and BMO, innocent and playful, continued to remind him of the child within, the spark of joy that should never be lost. All these influences shaped Finn into something more layered, more complex than the boy who once declared himself the hero of Ooo with unshakable certainty. He was now a young man who understood that love could wound as much as it healed, that loss was a companion to growth, and that the path of heroism was paved with mistakes as much as triumphs. In the stillness of bedtime thought, it is gentle to picture him during this stage. A boy with one arm lost, his heart tender from heartbreak, yet his eyes still lifted toward the stars. He does not weep endlessly, nor does he ignore his pain. He carries it quietly like a lantern in the dark. And in doing so, he becomes something greater than he ever imagined as a child. He becomes human in the truest sense, both fragile and enduring at once. There is a saying that the heart is the strongest muscle, yet also the most delicate. For Finn, this truth unfolded with each passing season of his youth. The battles he faced with monsters or curses often healed quickly enough, but the battles of the heart lingered far longer, weaving themselves into his thoughts like threads he could not untangle. His love for Bubblegum never fully vanished, though it softened into something different over time. Once he had dreamed of winning her heart through grand gestures and daring acts. Later he came to understand that her love for him was real, but not in the way he had hoped. It was the love of trust, of loyalty, of deep friendship. Important, yes, but not the romantic bond he longed for. Learning to accept this was not easy. There were moments when he tried again to bridge the distance, when he wrestled with jealousy or confusion. But slowly he began to let go of the dream of princess and knight, replacing it with something quieter, respect. With Flame Princess, the story burned brighter but ended more painfully. Their love was passionate, filled with energy, laughter, and the thrill of being equals in battle. Yet their differences cut through even their happiest moments. Flame Princess's struggles with anger and identity clashed with Finn's own restless need to protect and control outcomes. When their relationship fractured, Finn's sorrow was sharp and raw. He had given his heart fully, and in losing her, he felt the sting of emptiness more deeply than ever before. Nights in the tree fort grew quiet for him, his thoughts heavy even as Jake tried to fill the silence with humor. It was during this time that Finn's path grew more tangled with loss. The grass sword's curse, once only a tool, revealed its true cost. When it consumed his arm, leaving him with a phantom limb where once he had wielded his blade, Finn confronted a truth that every hero eventually faces. That sacrifice is not a story told, but a reality lived. His humanity, his fragility, was etched visibly onto his body. To the outside world, he remained the hero of Ooo, but within, he was a boy reckoning with the fact that even heroes can break. And yet these wounds, both physical and emotional, became the soil from which his deeper strength grew. Finn did not shy away from the pain. He mourned, yes. He carried his heartbreak, yes. But he also chose to continue, to adapt, to find new ways to fight and new ways to love. The boy who once believed that heroism was about victory came to understand that true heroism was about endurance. It was about rising again even after loss, about carrying the scars with grace rather than shame. These growing pains stretched into his relationships with those around him. With Jake, he began to test his independence, questioning who he was outside the shadow of his brother's easy confidence. With Marceline, he leaned into companionship that required no heroics, only presence. She, in her own way, taught him to sit with pain without running from it. Through their songs and quiet moments, Finn learned that loss did not need to silence him. It could be transformed into something meaningful. BMO, too, played a quiet role during this era. In their innocence, BMO reminded Finn that life could still be playful, that joy was not gone forever. The small games, the silly voices, the simple wisdom. They offered a kind of healing that no grand quest could provide. Through BMO, Finn found pieces of his childhood still intact, sparks of light that reminded him he was not defined only by heartbreak and scars. This stage of his timeline is a portrait of transition. Finn was no longer the pure-hearted boy who believed every story had a happy ending, nor was he yet the fully mature hero who had made peace with all his burdens. He was caught between, stumbling through mistakes, aching from loss, but slowly shaping himself into someone deeper. These years remind us that growing older is not marked only by height or skill. It is marked by the ways we learn to carry what once felt unbearable. In quiet reflection, we can imagine Finn at this stage, sitting under the branches of an ancient tree, his one hand tracing patterns in the dirt, his thoughts drifting like the wind. The sky above him is vast, the horizon endless, yet his gaze is not on the distance. It is turned inward toward the storms of his own heart. These moments of stillness, more than the battles or victories, reveal the essence of his growth. For it is in heartbreak that he learned empathy. It is in loss that he learned resilience. It is in pain that he discovered the depth of his humanity. And though these lessons were heavy, they also made him stronger than any blade or spell ever could. The heart is never finished teaching, and for Finn, the lessons of this stage continued to ripple through his life. Where once he measured his worth by how many quests he completed or how many princesses he saved, he now began to measure it by something quieter. How deeply he could feel, how much he could endure, how well he could carry both the light and the shadow within himself. These years were not defined by a single loss or heartbreak, but by a gradual unfolding of maturity. Each relationship, each wound, added another layer to who he was becoming. With Bubblegum, he learned the bittersweet nature of devotion that could never quite be returned in the way he hoped. With Flame Princess, he tasted the brilliance and the fragility of passion, understanding that love is as dangerous as it is beautiful. And with himself, he learned that even when love fails, the heart continues, reshaping itself in ways that make space for deeper compassion. The loss of his arm to the grass sword remained a turning point that echoed far beyond the physical. It became a symbol of all the ways growing older reshapes us. Childhood often feels limitless, as though nothing can truly harm us. But Finn's scar was a reminder that life marks us, and that those marks stay. He could no longer live with the invincibility of a child. Instead, he had to live with the acceptance of his own fragility. And yet, within that fragility lay a strength more profound than any blade could grant him. At the same time, Finn's perspective on Ooo shifted. He began to see not only the bright colors and playful adventures, but also the struggles of those who lived within its kingdoms. The Candy People, so cheerful on the surface, relied on Bubblegum's rule to survive. Flame Princess wrestled with her identity and the legacy of her father. Marceline carried memories of centuries of loneliness. Even the Ice King, once nothing more than an antagonist in Finn's eyes, revealed pieces of sorrow and tragedy that made him more complicated than any villain. These realizations did not crush Finn's spirit, they deepened it. He no longer fought merely because adventure was fun or because he wanted to be a hero. He fought because he understood that everyone carried struggles of their own, and his role was to lighten that burden however he could. His heart, softened by loss, became the core of his strength. And yet, even as he grew wiser, he never lost his brightness. This is perhaps the most remarkable part of Finn's journey through love and loss, that he did not allow the weight of heartbreak or the scars of battle to dim his spirit. His laughter still rang out. His optimism still carried him into each new day. His joy, though tempered with understanding, remained a flame that never went out. There is a kind of beauty in imagining him at this stage, sitting with Jake on the roof of the tree fort, gazing at the stars. The conversations were no longer just playful dreams of battles and treasure. They were deeper now, reflections on love, on destiny, on what it meant to grow up. Jake would crack a joke and Finn would laugh, but the laughter came from a place richer than before. It was laughter that had passed through sorrow and survived. In many ways, this stage of Finn's life can be seen as the bridge between boyhood and adulthood. He was still young, still full of wonder, but he had tasted loss enough to know that the world was not as simple as it once seemed. This bridge is often the hardest part of any journey, and Finn walked it with courage. Every heartbreak, every scar, every quiet night of reflection brought him closer to understanding who he was, not just as a hero, but as a human. The title of this chapter, Love, Loss, and Growing Pains, captures not only the trials he endured, but also the resilience he discovered. For love, though fleeting, taught him tenderness. Loss, though painful, taught him strength. And growing pains, though uncomfortable, taught him to keep moving forward even when the path was unclear. By now, Finn was no longer just the boy in the tree fort, or even just the hero of Ooo. His life had begun to brush against forces larger than kingdoms, larger than monsters, larger even than the world itself. He was stepping into the realm of the cosmic, the eternal threads that weave together time, space, and destiny. It began quietly, as so many turning points do. Strange doorways opened in his path, shimmering glimpses of realities beyond the one he knew. Encounters with beings like Prismo pulled Finn into spaces where the rules of life and death, past and future, no longer applied. In the glow of the time room, Finn came to see that he was not only a boy of Ooo, he was a figure caught in the web of infinite possibilities. Prismo himself was unlike any companion Finn had ever known. A wishmaster, radiant yet melancholy, who lived outside of time, shaping realities with gentle words. Through him, Finn saw that choices carried weight far beyond the moment. Every action branched into new paths, new worlds, new versions of himself. This realization was dizzying, even frightening, for a boy who once thought of life as simple quests and clear victories. And yet it was also comforting. If there were infinite versions of Finn, then perhaps no single mistake defined him. Perhaps the story of a hero was not one straight line, but a vast constellation of outcomes. But with this revelation came responsibility. The Lich, that ancient embodiment of death, returned again and again to haunt Finn, reminding him that evil was not bound by borders. It stretched across realities, seeking always to end life wherever it found it. In one haunting journey, Finn followed the Lich through a multiversal portal, only to glimpse a world where he himself had never existed, where humanity had survived in different ways. These glimpses unsettled him, reminding him that his own existence was not inevitable. It was fragile, like all life. And yet, standing in the face of the Lich's endless hunger, Finn's courage never faltered. If anything, the vastness of the threat only strengthened his resolve. He was no longer fighting for the safety of a single kingdom or even a single world. He was fighting for existence itself, for the fragile flame of life that flickered across realities. The more he ventured into these cosmic spaces, the more Finn began to feel the weight of destiny pressing on him. Was he chosen? Was he simply lucky? Was he a thread among many, or the central knot that held things together? These questions swirled in his heart, sometimes heavy enough to keep him awake at night. Yet even when the questions had no answers, Finn chose to keep moving. For him, heroism was not about understanding everything. It was about standing firm in the face of mystery, doing good even when the scale of the universe seemed overwhelming. And there were moments of strange peace within these cosmic adventures. Time in Prismo's chamber stretched differently, giving Finn rare pauses to reflect. Watching alternate versions of himself, older, younger, changed by different choices, was unsettling, but it also offered him perspective. He began to see that every version of himself, no matter how different, carried the same core, the desire to help, to protect, to care. That truth grounded him. It reminded him that even across the multiverse, he remained Finn the human. In bedtime quiet, it is gentle to imagine him drifting through these spaces, stars flowing past, like rivers, doors opening into endless worlds, his figure small yet steady as he stepped forward with the sword in hand. The boy of Ooo had grown into a hero who could stand at the edge of eternity and not be swallowed by fear. The cosmic journeys tested Finn in ways that no dungeon or monster ever could. When he crossed into alternate timelines, he was forced to confront not only new worlds, but new versions of himself. Each one was like a mirror reflecting what he might have become under different circumstances. One such reflection was Farm World Finn, a boy shaped by survival in a harsher timeline. In that reality, the Mushroom War had left humanity scattered, but alive. Farm World Finn lived not in a playful tree fort, but in a world where every day was a fight to endure. When Finn looked into the eyes of this counterpart, he saw both familiarity and strangeness. The same courage, the same will to protect, but hardened by a life without the whimsical wonders of Ooo. It was a reminder that he, too, could have been forged into something different if his path had bent another way. There were other versions as well, older Finns, younger Finns, Finns who had made different choices in love, in battle, in destiny. At times it was disorienting, almost overwhelming, to see so many possibilities stretched out before him. Yet rather than losing himself in confusion, Finn chose to hold on to the thread that bound them all together. No matter the shape of the world, and no matter the scars or victories, Finn remained someone who cared, someone who stood for others. That recognition steadied him, like a lighthouse shining across an ocean of stars. The Lich, however, was never far from these journeys. As the embodiment of entropy and death, the Lich slithered between timelines, seeking to extinguish life wherever it flickered. Facing him was unlike facing any other enemy. There was no bargaining, no redemption, no layer of sorrow hidden beneath his cruelty. The Lich was pure, unyielding finality. And yet, even against such darkness, Finn refused to bow. Time and again he stood in defiance, his small human form seeming almost insignificant against such cosmic horror. But within him burned something the Lich could not touch, a relentless love for life, fragile though it was. These confrontations revealed the paradox of Finn's existence. On one hand, he was only human, breakable, mortal, small in the grand scale of the universe. On the other, he was unshakable, because his courage came not from invincibility, but from choice. He chose to stand. He chose to fight. He chose to care, even when the cosmic scale suggested that nothing truly mattered. That choice, repeated again and again, became the essence of his heroism. In these journeys, Finn also encountered the delicate weave of time itself. Prismo's chamber, with its golden glow and suspended stillness, became both a refuge and a lesson. Within it, Finn saw that time was not a river flowing in one direction, but a vast ocean with countless currents. To step too carelessly could alter entire realities, yet to hesitate too long could let evil slip through the cracks. Balancing these truths required more than bravery. It required wisdom. And slowly, Finn began to cultivate that wisdom, not as an instant revelation, but as a quiet growth that came from each mistake, each success, each reflection on what had been. There was also comfort in Prismo himself. Though bound to his role as a wishmaster, Prismo carried a gentleness that Finn gravitated toward. Their conversations were not filled only with cosmic rules. They were also filled with humor, friendship, and the kind of easy warmth that reminded Finn of Jake. In Prismo's presence, the infinite did not feel so terrifying. It felt manageable, even welcoming, because it was shared. The deeper Finn traveled into the eternal, the more he began to see that destiny was not a single road, but a tapestry. At times he wondered if he had been chosen, if some cosmic force had marked him from the start. But other times he realized that perhaps it was not destiny at all. Perhaps it was simply his choices, repeated again and again, that shaped who he became. Whether chosen or not, the result was the same. He was Finn the human, standing at the intersection of countless possibilities, determined to live with courage no matter the scale. And so the boy who once dreamed of adventure in the meadows of Ooo now found himself walking among stars, facing the eternal with the same steady heart. Among the most profound truths Finn came to face in this chapter of his life was the realization that even the closest bonds could stretch into the cosmic. His adventures did not separate him from Jake. Instead, they revealed how deeply their souls were intertwined, even across the endless reaches of possibility. In some alternate visions, Finn saw worlds where Jake was not by his side. Those glimpses shook him more than any battle with the Lich ever could. Without Jake, the tree fort felt empty, the laughter of childhood silenced. These visions reminded him of how much of his strength was born from companionship. It was not just his sword or his courage that made him a hero. It was the warmth of his brother's presence, the knowledge that no matter how vast the universe became, he was never truly alone. There were also moments where Finn and Jake together encountered the eternal, facing trials that bent the rules of reality. Time loops, shifting dimensions, encounters with beings who existed outside of mortality. Through it all, Jake's calm humor and easy wisdom balanced Finn's fiery determination. In Jake, Finn saw that even eternity could be softened by laughter. Even when the questions of destiny felt heavy, Jake reminded him that sometimes the answer was as simple as living the moment, enjoying the company of those you love. And yet, these lessons did not erase the weight that destiny placed upon Finn. The multiverse opened before him like a vast library of lives, each page a different version of himself. To see so many possibilities was both empowering and unsettling. If there were infinite Finns, then who was he? Was he truly unique, or simply one thread among countless others? The question pressed on him during quiet nights, when stars shimmered above and the silence of Ooo felt like the pause between breaths. But with time, Finn found peace in the answer. He realized that uniqueness was not about being the only version of himself. It was about the choices he made. Each Finn, across each world, carried the same spark, but it was choice that gave that spark form. In this way, he saw that being human was not about destiny written in stone. It was about freedom, about deciding who you were, moment by moment, no matter the scale of the universe. His encounters with the Lich only deepened this truth. The Lich was relentless, eternal in his hunger for silence and death. Yet Finn met him, not only with sword and shield, but with defiance rooted in humanity. Where the Lich saw meaninglessness, Finn insisted on meaning. Where the Lich whispered that all things must end, Finn answered with the stubborn flame of love and hope. These confrontations were more than battles. They were dialogues between two forces, entropy and life, silence and song, despair and joy. Finn's victory was never absolute, but each time he stood, he proved that the fragile heart of a human could resist even the eternal pull of nothingness. In these moments, Finn also began to sense his own place in the great cycle of existence. The beings he met, Prismo, the cosmic entities, the echoes of alternate selves, all revealed to him that the universe was not chaos alone. There was order, there was pattern, there was mystery woven to every corner. And though he might never understand it all, Finn realized that he did not need to. His role was not to solve the infinite. It was to live within it, to bring kindness and courage into whatever space he touched. This perspective gave him a new kind of strength. When he looked out at the horizon now, he did not only see the kingdoms of Ooo. He saw a thread stretching beyond, connecting him to stars, to worlds unseen, to futures unwritten. He carried this vision not as a burden, but as a quiet wonder. For a boy once abandoned on a leaf in the woods, to stand now at the edge of eternity was nothing short of miraculous. And yet, Finn never let the cosmic strip away his humanity. Even after glimpsing the multiverse, even after brushing shoulders with the Eternal, he still laughed with Jake, still played with BMO, still shared songs with Marceline. These small, ordinary joys were his anchor. They reminded him that no matter how vast the universe became, life was lived in the present, in the warmth of companionship, in the steady rhythm of the everyday. In the hush of bedtime imagination, it is easy to picture Finn drifting through the stars, his figure silhouetted against glowing constellations, yet tethered always to the laughter of home. His story was not just about cosmic battles or eternal truths. It was about the boy who faced them with a human heart, carrying love into places where even time and space seemed to falter. As Finn's life brushed deeper against the eternal, he found himself caught between awe and humility. The universe stretched out before him in endless patterns, yet within that immensity he discovered a strange kind of intimacy. Every choice, every act of kindness, every moment of courage was like a ripple moving outward, touching realities he might never see. He was small, yes, but never insignificant. There were times when the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm him. To gaze at infinity is to risk feeling swallowed, and Finn often wondered how someone like him, a single human boy in a land already strange, could possibly matter in the face of such scale. But whenever those doubts crept in, he remembered the faces of those he loved. Jake, Marceline, Bubblegum, BMO, even the candy folk who looked to him for help. They were his reminder that the meaning of life was not measured in size, but in depth. One small act of love could outshine an endless void. His adventures with Prismo became especially precious. In the Wishmaster's golden chamber, Finn could pause, reflect, and see beyond the frantic pace of daily battles. There he learned that eternity was not only heavy, it could also be gentle, like a breath that stretches across all time. Prismo's easy companionship taught Finn that even cosmic beings carried loneliness, and that friendship was a bond strong enough to cross the boundaries of reality itself. In Prismo, Finn saw a mirror of what he might one day become, someone who endures, who carries both lightness and sorrow, who remains kind even when eternity presses in. The Lich remained a shadow in these years, always searching for cracks in the weave of existence. Yet each confrontation reinforced what Finn had come to understand, that good and evil were not simply about power, but about perspective. The Lich embodied the belief that all things must end, and that silence was the only truth. Finn embodied the opposite, that even if life is fleeting, it is worth fighting for. These clashes were not only physical, they were philosophical, almost spiritual. And every time Finn raised his sword, every time he stood his ground, he declared that love and joy had value, even against eternity itself. The cosmic trials also gave Finn glimpses of his own mortality. He saw older versions of himself, worn by time, carrying burdens he could not yet imagine. He saw younger versions, still innocent, unaware of the pain that awaited. These visions reminded him that life was not a straight line of victories. It was a cycle of beginnings and endings, joys and losses. Far from discouraging him, these glimpses deepened his appreciation for the present. To see the future was to cherish the now. To see alternate paths was to embrace the one he walked. And so Finn's story at this stage became one of balance. He stood between the small and the infinite, between the child he once was and the man he was becoming, between the laughter of friends and the silence of eternity. This balance defined him more than any sword, any crown, any title. He was human, and that was enough. When we picture him in this cosmic chapter, it is not only in the heat of battle or the glow of Prismo's chamber. It is also in the quiet moments afterward. Finn, sitting on the roof of the tree fort. The stars above him, no longer distant strangers, but familiar companions. Jake stretched out beside him, humming softly. The night is cool, the air filled with the gentle rustle of leaves. In that stillness, Finn does not need to solve the mysteries of the multiverse. He only needs to breathe, to smile, to know that even in a universe of endless paths, his own is meaningful. This is the gift of the cosmic and the eternal, not only the revelation of infinity, but the reminder of what matters within it. Finn's journey through this stage did not strip him of his humanity. It anchored him in it. He learned that being small did not mean being powerless, and that to carry love into the vastness of existence was the bravest act of all.